This is the story of how I developed Courage, a child protection community engagement program aimed at empowering individuals, families, and communities around the world. Child protection is the prevention and responding to violence, exploitation, and abuse against children. It is very important, as issues such as child abuse, neglect, and exploitation can lead to anxiety, depression, suicide, learning disorders, post-traumatic stress, and developmental challenges. In the long term, a life of violence can result in substance abuse, poor self-regulation, risky sexual behavior, and toxic stress that impacts negatively on a person's health and well-being. My name is Dee Blackie, and in the 90s and early 2000s, I spent most of my time helping some amazing South African and global brands to develop their visions. The problem is, when you introduce something new, even if it is an inspiring new vision, people get scared. Change is scary after all. So by default, in the process of developing all these inspiring visions, I had to become an expert in change management. In this, I was inspired by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a Swiss psychiatrist who studied how people grieve and identified a number of stages that people go through when they lose someone close to them. Any change is actually a loss and is experienced as this. So whether you lose a loved one, or you change your job, or your company gets bought out by a new brand, you are still going to go through these stages of change. I have summarized the stages and added a few of my own, but essentially people go through three major phases. A holding on phase, where you hold on to the past, a letting go phase, where you let go of the past, and a moving forward phase, where you've engaged with the change and grown through the process. These phases happen over time and impact dramatically on your levels of self-confidence. So when something new happens that has a profound impact on you and your life, the first response is that of shock. I can't believe this has happened. Then we go into denial. I refuse to believe that this has happened. But slowly but surely it dawns on us that our world has changed, and we move into awareness and finally acceptance. The important point to note at this stage is that it is a very healthy phase, as we are moving from holding on to the past to letting go. The only problem is our confidence levels are very low. What does this mean for me? My job? How should I behave? As quickly as possible, a good change management process will get you to the phase of understanding and testing. This is what it means, this is how your job will change, and this is how you should behave. Finally, we move forward, and it's important to note that you will always be in a better position when you move forward, as people grow through change. One of the biggest issues I encountered in these visioning processes is that a company's leadership would develop a new vision. They would go through shock, denial, awareness, acceptance, and understanding, and at the point of testing, they would tell the rest of their organization. They would then find it really frustrating when their people started to go through shock, denial, and so on. So this is a useful picture to remind people that change is a process. In the early days, I used a really simple model to help people engage with change, which looked at two key dimensions. The first was, do the employees understand what the company vision is? And secondly, do they live this vision with passion and commitment? Simply put, we needed to make sure that everyone knew what the vision actually was. And secondly, we also needed to make sure that they'd converted the organization's values into specific behaviors that they could deliver on every day. On these two dimensions, you had four kinds of people. The poor old lost souls who neither knew what the vision was nor the values and were therefore coming to work every day for a paycheck. The second group were the bystanders who knew what the vision was but believed that the reason people bought into the brand was because of them, not this amazing organization that they work for. The third group, the loose cannons, were extremely passionate about the company, but unfortunately they were often saying all the wrong things to all the right people most of the time, as they didn't know what the unifying vision was. And finally, there were the stars, who lived the vision with passion and commitment. The only problem was, I found in more and more organizations that even if people knew what their vision and values were, many were so disempowered that they didn't know how to effect real change. So I set myself a challenge. I asked myself, what drives personal and community empowerment? And then I spent the next few years exploring this. Having read tons of books on personal empowerment, infinite possibility, leadership, and spiritual enlightenment, I noticed that the same 7 themes came up over and over again. Interestingly, they were tools that I used in the world of branding, and the more I talked to people about them, the more I could tell when an organization and the people within it were empowered and when they were not. As an individual, a company, or a community, answering these 7 questions will help you to understand how empowered you are. Firstly, what are your values and beliefs? Who do you partner with, and how do you partner them? What is your level of self-esteem and self-worth? How are you building love, harmony, and a sense of togetherness in your organization, rather than getting everyone to compete against each other for your favor? What is your vision and purpose? How do you continue to build this through ongoing knowledge and insight? And finally, how are you turning all of these good things into real and tangible actions every day? As the picture illustrates, if you want to grow a tree tomorrow, you have to plant a seed today. And this was how I explained it to people. Simply put, building personal and community empowerment takes 3 steps. Firstly, you need to believe in possibility. Secondly, you need to have some level of self-awareness. And finally, you need to do these 2 things in the context of abundance. If you think about it, when we are young, we all have a relatively high level of belief in possibility, but we are not particularly self-aware. We are what I term unconsciously empowered. We believe we can do anything, be anything. We're just not sure how at this point. Then different people arrive in our lives and tell us, well, you can't actually be what you want to be because of your age, or the color of your skin, or the fact that you're a girl or a boy, or you're too old. You get the picture. Suddenly we find ourselves in the space of being unconsciously disempowered. We no longer believe anything is possible, and we don't know why we're in such a dark hole. Interestingly, the people who put us in these dark holes are the consciously disempowered, and this is the 3rd dimension we need to be aware of. These people have a high degree of self-awareness. They are often very clever, but their vision is based on scarcity rather than abundance. They believe that there will never be enough for everyone in the world, and so the only way to get what they want is to take it away from other people. And obviously, where we want to be is consciously empowered. So how do we do this? Well, to build self-awareness, we need to know what our values and beliefs are. We need to partner with other people to test these values and beliefs. And we need to ensure that we have a healthy sense of self-esteem and self-worth, and that we are adding value to the world around us. To build our belief in possibility, we need to have a vision for ourselves, a purpose for our lives. We need to build on this constantly through gaining knowledge and insight. And finally, we need to turn this vision, knowledge, and insight into action, preferably on a daily basis. And finally, we need to build our self-awareness and belief in possibility in the context of love and abundance, and the knowledge that there is more than enough for everyone to live their best life in this world. So this was my new approach to business and brand engagement, and the impact was quite frankly profound in every organization I engaged with. At the time of all this consulting work, I was, however, going through some profound grief and change of my own. I have 2 beautiful children, but I also lost 7 little stars through miscarriage, the final one in 2009, which left me infertile and struggling with postpartum depression. I decided to take a break from consulting in 2010 and spend some time with my family. It was World Cup year, so we had a wonderful time making makarappas, learning the disky dance, and blowing our vuvuzelas for Bafana Bafana, our soccer team. In July, however, just as the tournament had started, I was shocked to see a picture in a local newspaper of a newborn baby who'd been abandoned and died on a rubbish heap on the outskirts of a township in Johannesburg where I live. I was heartbroken. I decided to contact some of the child protection organizations I had worked with in the past to ask them what was going on. They were in despair and told me that in the past they would get a few children abandoned every month into their care, but now they were getting 5 or 6 children abandoned every single week. This was a real problem. I decided to roll my sleeves up and get involved in the child protection community, which led to a number of new adventures. In 2011, I helped to facilitate the formation of a national adoption coalition for South Africa. Why adoption, you may ask? Well, when you've been abandoned and there is no way to track down your biological family, the best long-term outcome for a child is to be adopted into a family where they can belong. We defined a new vision which was about empowering the child protection community to create positive and permanent change in the lives of our children, and I developed a range of community engagement posters which we used to talk to people about crisis pregnancy, child abandonment and adoption with a wonderful picture-based training company called Trainiac. I also decided to go back to university to complete my master's degree exploring the lived experience of child abandonment in South Africa. Whilst presenting on my research and training program at the Nordic Adoption Conference of 2013, I was approached by the Swedish Foundation for Children Without Parental Care to develop a new community engagement program. Unbeknownst to me, my existing training was being used across Africa on the theme of child protection. The foundation asked whether I could develop a program that would help to improve the gatekeeping functions of child protection officers around the world. The first question was, where do I start? I decided to use the trusted business tool of segmentation to understand the world of child protection better. This involved exploring this world from a number of different perspectives, which include the who. Who is the child, the perpetrator, the child protection officer? The what? What are all the child protection challenges that exist out there in the world today? The how? What are all the current child protection solutions currently supporting child protection officers? The where do most child protection challenges take place? In the home, in schools, in the community? The when do different child protection challenges take place? In utero, as a newborn, as toddlers, as children, teens, and so on? And finally, the why, or more specifically, what reasons perpetrators of child protection challenges give for abusing, neglecting, and exploiting a child? And finally, how do all of these issues relate to each other? This revealed a number of key insights into the world of child protection and where this new program could add value. The first insight was that most of the existing programs place the problem rather than the child at the center of their solution. So you will have a poverty alleviation solution, or a nutrition solution, or an abuse solution, or a trafficking solution. But what happens when you get a child who's been abandoned at a very young age? They are HIV positive as they were trafficked into the sex industry. They have not attended school, and they've never eaten a decent meal in their life. It changes our perspective when we build our solutions around the child, rather than trying to see who fits into which child protection program. The second key insight was that all child protection challenges are based on some form of disempowerment. I realized this when I was trying to explore the area of why in my segmentation process. What was fascinating was that all of the reasons that perpetrators gave for abusing, exploiting, or neglecting children fit almost perfectly into the opposite driver of the 7 empowerment areas I discussed before. Instead of values, there was general violence and inequality. Instead of partnership, you had isolated individuals who were often exploited. Instead of high self-esteem, you had low self-esteem. Instead of love and harmony, you had hate and fear and a lack of forgiveness. Instead of having a vision, you had people who were apathetic and often addicted to drugs or alcohol. Instead of knowledge and insight, you had ignorance and corruption. And instead of presence and action, you had neglect and non-delivery. And while it was very depressing to read all of these different reasons for enacting violence against children, I was suddenly very excited. As if we know the disempowerment driver, then we also know the opposite and equally powerful empowerment driver that we can use to solve the problem. What was also interesting was that this sense of disempowerment had infiltrated our very way of protecting children. In child protection, you get 3 kinds of people: a child protection officer, a child, and a perpetrator, or someone who's done something wrong to a child. What often happens in the world of child protection is that in the process of trying to protect the child, this group of people often descend into what Stephen Carpin refers to as a drama triangle. In this drama, the child protection officer becomes a rescuer who tries to save the child becomes a victim, and the perpetrator becomes a persecutor. Because everyone is disempowered, the drama tends to go round and round in circles, where victim becomes persecutor, persecutor becomes rescuer, and rescuer becomes victim, and so on. The key is to move out of this drama and into a space of empowerment, where the child protection officer becomes an enabler. They are not rescuing the child, they are providing the child or parents with choices, and then empowering them to make the right choices. The victim becomes a survivor or thriver, and the persecutor becomes an accountable person who knows the difference between right and wrong. The final insight was that this was a massive change management project that spanned individuals, families, communities, and society at large. Finding out that someone in your community or family has raped or abused a child is as much of a shock as losing a loved one. We also go through those stages of change, from shock, I can't believe this has happened in our family or community, to denial, perhaps the child is lying, to awareness, there are clear signs of abuse, to acceptance, what are we going to do about this, to understanding and testing, how do we make sure that this never happens again. This meant that the engagement program would have to take people as quickly as possible through these different stages to ensure real and sustainable changes in behavior. So how do we do this? I was inspired by Lego for the solution. The idea was to create a number of different toolkit elements, and depending on what challenges are showing up in a community, the participants can identify and build a solution that is unique to their environment and the problems within it. The pieces would be the same, but the outcome could be completely different depending on how the pieces are applied. From a branding perspective, I positioned Courage as an ingredient brand, meaning that it can only exist inside other partner organizations or institutions. When I was doing my research, I asked all of the child protection officers I worked with, if you could take a pill to help you do what you do every day, what would you like inside it? Without exception, all of the doctors, nurses, social workers, religious leaders, police officers, teachers, and community members, young and old, stated that they would like more courage, and so the brand was born. So what does this look like in practice? The basic toolkit is made up of 4 picture-based posters. The first illustrating a typical community anywhere in the world, complete with people, spaces, and the child protection challenges they are dealing with. The second illustrates children's rights and needs based on developmental stages, essentially how a child should grow up. The third illustrates the shift from disempowerment to empowerment drivers of change. And the final poster illustrates the step-by-step approach to child protection and safeguarding. There are also 2 packs of cards, a disempowerment pack that details every single child protection challenge that exists in the world today and the 7 disempowerment drivers that cause them, and an empowerment pack that details the empowerment drivers, child development stages, children's rights, and importantly, responsibilities that come with those rights. Finally, there is an easy-to-use Train the Trainer poster. For the workshop, facilitators can run all or some of the following exercises with their participants. All workshops start with a visioning session where we ask participants what kind of world they would like their children to grow up in. As stimulus input, we share children's rights as defined by the United Nations, UNICEF, the African Union, and our own South African Children's Act. We illustrate a world of rights where children are safe and secure, are registered and have an identity and a family, versus a world of no rights, where children have no access to education, are abused and neglected, and have no sense of belonging or identity. We also look at how they should be developing, from in utero and their first years of life, all the way to puberty, hormones, and early adulthood. This is an example from the Seychelles, where the National Council for Children managed to get the entire country to engage in developing a new vision for their children, coordinated through their national newspapers. Sometimes it is the children themselves who get to define their ideal community that they would like to live in. In this workshop from a school in the Johannesburg inner city, I remember being particularly shaken by the number of children who just wanted a safe place to go to the bathroom. The next step is critical in moving participants beyond shock and denial into awareness and acceptance. We use the community map for this exercise and ask participants to identify all of the child protection challenges that they have observed in their community. This is a powerful exercise, as if we don't acknowledge that there are challenges, we cannot start to fix them. This is a group of psychiatrists and nurses identifying the child protection challenges in their community at a psychiatric hospital in Johannesburg. They noted how courage operates in the grey area, where challenges present at a community level, but certain individuals start to emerge as having real mental health concerns. This illustrates the community map up close. We can see how challenges such as drug and alcohol abuse, child abuse, crisis pregnancy, and depression or suicide can show up in a community. There are 48 unique child protection cards in the Courage Toolkit, and therefore challenges that children are experiencing around the world. Each card details what the challenge is and what needs to be considered in terms of its impact on children and the community they live in. At this point in the workshop, participants are encouraged to go through all the cards to understand what the challenge is, if it is happening in their community, and if it is, to prioritize the challenge as a low, medium, or high problem. This is an example of the late termination of pregnancy or late abortion card, which is often not understood as a child protection challenge, as the child has yet to be born. This illustrates how child protection challenges can manifest, as in the example of physical abuse, and how the challenge impacts negatively on a child's rights and psychosocial development. Participants discuss each challenge in the context of their community and then decide what impact it is having. This is the first step in building understanding in the process of change. Now that the problems have been identified, understood, and prioritized, it is important that solutions are found. Participants get to map their high priority challenges to the disempowerment drivers causing them, based on their experience in their community. Then, using the opposite empowerment driver, they start to create solutions. The key to this exercise is getting participants to think through an empowered approach to problem solving by firstly identifying what the problem is, then understanding what is driving the problem, and finally looking at empowered solutions to solve it. In this particular example, children from a school noted how their teachers often emotionally abused the learners. The children associated the challenge with the disempowerment driver of abuse, and then decided that the best way to solve the problem was to use love. They came up with an in-class campaign entitled "Love Your Teacher and Your Teacher Will Love You," learning that love is often a far more powerful way to solve conflict than violence. The next set of tools is about sharing pragmatic step-by-step approaches to solving child protection challenges, as defined by our Children's Act, from safeguarding in the event of child abandonment, neglect, abuse, or exploitation, to discussing sex, birth control, conception, and pregnancy, to option counselling for crisis pregnancy, to positive parenting approaches and the process of adoption, several detailed programs have been developed. Once we have defined the process, community members are encouraged to link this back to their community map and specific people and spaces that they will need to engage with to ensure the protection of their children, as illustrated in this community workshop focused on the need for adoption in Sebokeng. One of the most important things to remember in child protection is that no person is an island. It is crucial to identify and then develop relationships with community partners that can support you in your efforts. Developing a partnership strategy is a two-step approach. First, you must identify your partners, and then you must develop a win-win relationship with each of them. These postgraduate social work students in the Northwest are using the community map to identify possible partnerships that they can develop in communities they have been deployed to for the practical component of their degree. In this example from the Seychelles, these two community partners were initially unhappy with having to work together on this exercise, but by the end they had defined a shared vision and detailed what they needed and expected from each other to achieve their goal moving forward. The partnership exercise is often one of the most powerful in the Courage Toolkit, as it gets communities to start working together. Towards the end of the workshop, we return to our vision statement that we defined at the start and ask ourselves, what values will drive the behaviors that will help us achieve our vision? As stimulus for this exercise, participants are encouraged to look at the children's rights that were defined at the start of the workshop and understand that for every right, such as the right to education or legal protection, there is an equally important responsibility, such as working hard or abiding by the law. This is an especially fun but important exercise to do with children. Once they've understood how rights link to responsibilities, participants define and agree the values that will help them to achieve their vision for themselves and their community. The final step in the Courage Community Workshop is defining what actions people will take once the workshop is over. Participants agree what they will need to stop doing now that they understand children's rights and child protection, what they will need to start doing, and importantly, what they will need to continue doing, which are things they were already doing and are still relevant to achieving their child protection vision. The most common response from participants at the close of a workshop is, "I will speak up more," which indicates how many challenges are happening all around us that we are not addressing. Sometimes the action planning is done at a very personal level, as with this personal vision plan that we use with some of our high school workshops. What was important in this exercise is that each child signed and dated a personal action plan which they could use to hold themselves to account. Beyond understanding how these concepts drive personal and community empowerment, the aim of Courage workshops is to use practical exercises that can easily be adapted to participants' personal lives and circumstances. Beyond South Africa, Courage has been used by child protection organizations around the world, sometimes just within a particular area of focus, such as child trafficking in India, and at other times as an approach to child protection at a country level, as in the case of Zambia and the Seychelles. We have engaged with over 600 child protection organizations, 2,500 child protection officers, and over 2,000 children and students using the Courage Toolkit and process since 2015. As we focus on a train-the-trainer approach, Courage community coaches are empowered to continue to take Courage's message to as many people as possible around the world. If you would like to download a free Courage Toolkit and understand how to run a Courage workshop, please visit couragechildprotection.com. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our Courage channel. Thanks for watching, stay strong, and take courage.